Good morning, America. I am contacting you in the best of wishes this morning. I have a bit of a brusque nature about me sometimes. I am going to try to be as professional as possible. First, I am going to acknowledge that the specific genetic indicator that is being stimulated right now is not the same one that was being stimulated yesterday when I composed this. I will acknowledge that. Nonetheless, I'm confident that this is the correct time and comportment to speak to you as your president. Yesterday, I was perusing a manual that I had found before. I've not read through the entirety of the manual. My understanding is that it is a manual concerning comportment associated with the internal affairs operations of local police departments. I first encountered it some time ago, but at the time I first encountered it, I was concerned. It fits into a kind of situation where actual documents that are produced by government agencies, I understand, have been disabused. There has been a failure to appropriately engage in the enforcement aspects of law enforcement duties for a considerable amount of time. And instead, there has been a prioritization on the potential financial advantages that come with having access to law enforcement resources. Now, these sort of concerns go all the way back to a formal effort I made in August of 2016 to contact the Department of Justice in Chicago, Illinois. I am aware it was an election season, and I had actually declared my intent to run for office that election season. But it was not in an official candidate type situation that I went to the Department of Justice in Chicago. At that time, the understanding I had was that the then mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, had called it for cooperation with a Department of Justice investigation into a number of police shootings that had happened in the city, including one that was very controversial and that had happened relatively recently. And it was a part of several protests in the city of Chicago that had been occurring throughout a substantial period of time, but specifically 2016. I will disclose I did attend one of those protests myself in person in downtown Chicago. But I also had a different relationship. My concern had to do specifically with concerns that the actual financing of municipal operations may have more to do with the heightened risks associated regarding encounters between law enforcement and individuals. And while I did not understand the specifics, my concern was that this was something that was being obstructed from public presentation and was not being appropriately factored into people's responses, including responses about community education and preparedness in terms of what it might mean to encounter the police. I have in the past attended other presentations, know your rights presentations, or even presentations that have a particular perspective on the history of law enforcement in this country, including very, very potentially devastating role that an abuse of power associated with law enforcement can have on communities. But I also come from a family of law enforcement. I also come from a family that was in the military and was proud of this. And despite these factors, it's important to have a more nuanced view, not only from one perspective versus another, but also from the myriad factors that allow for these things to actually be considered a part of our lives so that we understand our self interest in actually dealing with them. And for me, as far as I'm concerned, the specific and significant and oftentimes disproportionate investment in law enforcement of a certain kind is also an indicator of disinvestment or underinvestment in other sectors of community that also provide another way of seeing law enforcement and engaging with law enforcement that's been highly underutilized. So yesterday, I composed something that was sort of a culmination of what I'd already been working on and what I would have presented as an in-person actual presentation. My understanding is the people I was talking to were primarily, or the audience would have been primarily people that had an interest in the initial report, which was provided by a Department of Justice grant in 2005. And one of the major authors, or one of the offices that had accepted responsibility, was in connection with the police department in Los Angeles. Now, I understand there's a lot of controversy, but there's also a very important reason why it has to be approached directly. So what I'm going to do is in accordance with what I understand. It's not a executive order. This is not even an executive proclamation, but it would be an official on the record presentation concerning these issues. And traditionally, I understand that when such things happen, that if they are, for instance, to be considered a part of the official record, for instance, if there were to have been a corollary, which there well could be, actual executive order associated with this, that it would be something that would be composed and then it would be published publicly on the official record of the government 2 days or maybe more, as we have a weekend. It wouldn't be published until Monday. But I'm going to read this now and then I'm going to publish it on my blog while we figure out the logistics and the technicalities about the actual functioning of the official government operations at this very important transitional time, and in consideration of the other very high level, very high concern matters we have to deal with. So I'm just going to read it and then I'm going to post it publicly. I welcome any questions or comments from anybody. Please keep it professional. I have, even if you need to express yourself directly, that's perfectly fine. Even if you feel that you have to convey very important information, the manner of presentation is not as important as the sincerity and the intent to actually follow through on taking a stake in seeing this to fruition in whatever manner it needs to be negotiated. COPS has a sordid history in many places, meaning community-oriented policing strategies. Recall the criticism of its role in Operation Urban Shield, for instance. But insofar as there were appropriations that were awarded a grant for this DOJ publication on internal affairs investigations in 2005, then what has resulted since then? Most pension schemes, including police pension schemes, have increasingly focused on demographic information as a basis upon which to evaluate employee compensation, as well as, I anticipate, employee availability for compensation considerations. Additionally, considerations of righting wrong to which communities have been subjected are often reflected by local administrations as being contingent upon agreement to demonstrate a certain recapitulation of the demographic representation on the force, reflecting the composition of the communities most primarily engaged by law enforcement. This has deficiencies in two primary manners. A. It does not speak to the totality of the actual engagement of and by law enforcement in local processes when it comes to non-apparent relationships, including surveillance infrastructure and the manners in which data acquired in connection with the surveillance infrastructure is made available to other sectors of the locality, including for purposes of financial consideration, and it does not include the material basis for the economic causes of crime, including the disparity in terms of opportunities for material resources to be made accessible and held accountable. This impacts the disproportionate valuations of law enforcement efforts and the overall matrix of its engagement with communities. If there is not enough crime being targeted in sectors wherein it is occurring that have abused resources and subjected resources necessary for economic stability to fraud and engagement in and through criminal processes, so it can be protected against unlawful engagement in illegal activities, then its circulation in and within other communities through some other form of redistribution only serves to continue perpetuating crimes disproportionately within communities of color or communities disproportionately deprived otherwise of the resources to support themselves economically. This is demonstrated in the recent events of the last year, specifically when protests against police have been specifically coordinated with issuance of municipal bonds in cities wherein a police encounter resulted in the death of someone whose last name was connected to litigation that referenced someone with the same name. This is, I contend, evidentiary of the original allegations regarding the specific pattern connected to fraud involving group insurance policies that can provide consideration of the reserves of municipal bonds. The civil litigious dimension of a response to and regarding police brutality and or an officer-involved shooting speaks to the manners in which municipal resources are drawn down in terms of the payment to the community. But ultimately, even such restitution is actually still drawing down on the credit of the community as collateral based upon its relationship with the overall public financing of the municipality. Recently, there was an announcement of a lawsuit in the city of New York that discussed benefits for first responders of 9/11. This is, I believe, a very important element in consideration of this very condition. There is a necessary consideration of providing certain kinds of qualified pooling of people in law enforcement or other first responder roles that would not circulate within the other pools. But at the same time, if there is not another means by which resources can circulate otherwise, then the social impact of the economic disparities become even more evident. It can be causal of the proliferation of certain kinds of crime that is acknowledged under the specifications of what is designated as priority police work in various areas while other kinds of crime are not investigated or prosecuted. This then impacts the overall valuations of the law enforcement resources that the community has to work with. I contend now and have contended that the internal affairs functions of local police forces necessarily need to provide a more important informative role. The implications of effective internal controls with the success of such efforts need to be refactored into consideration of the value communities have to work with. This should also correlate with a focus on white-collar crime at a more local and immediate level, with less of a focus on clandestine or covert sting-type operations that have not factored in the role of educating the public about how to avoid or protect oneself against financial crimes that could proliferate into other forms of crime. This is not exclusively about the police not performing certain responsibilities, but rather about municipal planning regimes that have not appropriately factored in the implications and valuations of internal control demonstrations as an indicator of viability and value. The economic implications of the surveillance regime need to be accounted for in this regard. The balance of circulating individual private wealth in and through the local municipalities that support law enforcement activities, as well as the compensation of individuals employed in the various law enforcement roles, needs to be focused on. Dispossessing individuals in communities of their wealth through illegal surveillance or unnecessary surveillance accomplished via poor policy implementation that itself may be evidentiary of crime at another level, for which enforcement has been significantly lacking, has long-term implications on the misrepresentation of actual obligation incurred in a great deal of municipalities. I have personal experience with this disparity involving 5 major cities in 5 years, specific to the misvaluation of the police force and its role in the larger factors within which municipal operations occur. This can only incentivize crime by law enforcement, and the resultant economy, including political economy, follows suit. Much needs to be done on the federal or even state level to recapitulate priorities around concepts of crime and the focus of crime, as well as the punishments for that crime, in order to attend to this appropriately. Specifically, financial crimes that are addressed via an overrepresentation of accommodation as payment of penalties or fines, including in manners that have yet to be divested of a longer-term form of divestiture from legitimate recirculation outside of the crime operators in the financial sector, need to be attended to. We need reform of criminal justice, not only from a perspective of decriminalizing lower-level offenses, but in training and enforcement of laws regarding serious theft and crime in other sectors and at other levels. When we address crime at the other levels from which people have been dispossessed, then we can actually obtain the resources of those sectors for legitimate recirculation into the community in such manners that deter the crime by removing the underlying causes of underrepresentation and access to the means of self-sufficiency. Identifying crime as being accomplished by certain demographics of people is more capable of being perpetuated when the crime committed by other demographics of people is not prosecuted as crime, but rather is accommodated in or via a systematology that incentivizes certain kinds of illicit behavior. It is in such disparities that the attempts to normalize or even legalize illegal activity come to define the political priorities of movements for justice. If there is fraud or crime involved in the assessment of the financial status of the municipalities, then this must be meted out at the level it is at and not permitted to be written off or covered up via alternative means that are themselves crimes. Such crimes do contribute to the proliferation of other kinds of crime that may occur within a municipality if they are not addressed as crime, and hence enforcement of such crime is not a credit to the municipality. This is the kind of resource that is needed by our communities and our country. It is for these reasons that local police departments need to start to redefine the value to their own self-interest in having a functioning and effective internal affairs mechanism. It is also for this reason that local municipalities need to start seeing the value and self interest of having an accountable internal affairs mechanism. I contend it will take substantial reform of the financial sector, including through prosecutions as well as legislative refinement, in order to redefine concepts of municipal financing, including its role in the overall benefits and pension systems of the localities of concern, and that one major means by which to account for this is to reconceptualize local pension systematologies to see the value and need of effective internal affairs operations. This not only gives the community served by law enforcement a form of social insurance and understanding there is a functioning corrective mechanism for potential police abuse, but also provides another standard that is not about targeting individuals based on their physical characteristics, but rather job performance as a potential primary indicator of the success or capacities of law enforcement. This can provide a more qualitative indicator for consideration of how police activity factors into overall municipal operations, which in turn determines consideration of the actual financial status of the municipalities. Now, my understanding is that the original report specifically provided information on 12 police departments and one sheriff's department. A sheriff's department that was also within the area of one of the police departments of concern. This report was concerning a grant awarded to Los Angeles in 2005. Now, that's more than 15 years ago. And it's very important to see, well, where are they at with that on one hand? But on the other hand, it also provides a foundation for us to really look at some of the things that have gone on in the last year. I'm also going to acknowledge that this is going to be the first of many discussions on these matters. The concept of job performance and an understanding of what are considered acceptable, literal, verifiable indicators of performance are the things that we need to focus on and factor into considerations of our entire relationship with labor and with the understanding of labor and its relationship to the other matters at hand, including energy and the energy sector. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's ongoing at this time is a consideration of long-term effort to address job performance and its relationship to the energy sector. And because of the very specific processes that are touched upon in this presentation, then those are going to be very important matters for us to consider in the future. But at the beginning, I'm going to start with this. I hope everybody has a good day. I look forward to whatever the questions or considerations are. Please make sure that they're formal and on the record and in a manner you would want to be publicly accountable for. And just so you know, I personally do not find the use of an expletive here and there to be something that would remove you from my consideration. But at the same time, I do not tolerate any racist, anti-Semitic, or sexist behaviors. Thank you. Have a good day.